Now we continue with an excerpt from Mike Sherman's memoirs. I remember at some point being concerned about this mandatory 20-year obligation. I guess I was imagining some sort of day in and day out, regimented, strictly enforced and controlled, routine drudgery, where I'd be working some job that I didn't choose and had zero interest in. I would be just putting in my time for 20 years so that the rest of my life could be happy. The picture I was painting wasn't very desirable at all. In fact, it was quite bleak. We'd be under a system that would be counting every minute of your time, not giving you any leeway, marking out your 20-year sentence. Was I willing to pay that price? In the money system, it seemed as though I would have more choice, more flexibility, and frankly, more fun while I was working. And I had the freedom to quit any time and go find another job if things didn't suit me where I was. To a degree, I was master of my own fate and destiny. Sure, there were clearly some great advantages in the cooperative system. In fact, mostly advantages. Really, in all honesty, it was those 20 years of hard labor that was holding me back from embracing cooperativism fully. I knew Jordan felt the same way, and I'm sure there were others that had the same concerns and hesitations as I did, so I voiced those concerns. Of course, Jordan jumped on board right away. Someone in this group finally realizes the type of environment you people are heading toward here, he said. People thought about it a minute, a good minute. Then Ken said, "Wow, I haven't been picturing it like that at all. I envisioned it as a far more forgiving and flexible atmosphere, more like a group of people working together to accomplish a necessary task, and all pitching in to get it done, with no one particularly policing it, and no one particularly getting on someone else's case about it." To which Jordan replied, "Now that is truly naive. So everyone will automatically get along and brotherly love will reign everywhere. So now this cooperative system of yours is going to miraculously change human nature. Oh boy, are you ever in for a rude awakening in life?" Well, I'm not really worried because I don't think this whole cooperativism thing has any shot at all at ever being successfully put into practice. However, I will give you this, that there have been some very good points made thus far in our discussions, points that have truly made me pause and think, and admittedly, some that have actually changed my ideas and ways of looking at things, in particular, the many faults and imperfections of the money system. And these detrimental qualities should and must be addressed. But that's what government is for. That's why we vote to fix and improve these things. The money system innately works and has for hundreds of years. Sure, there are problems. There will be in any system. There will be imbalances. But you work with them. You solve them. You don't throw out the entire system and replace it with something that has no track record, something that hasn't been tested or proven and tried to some degree. Almost immediately, Carter followed with, "America did." No one quite understood that remark, so there was a pause and inquisitive looks. Jordan then put a voice to the pause. "What?" he asked. Carter continued, "America did just that. The Founding Fathers threw off a system of government that was impeding the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness of the people, and forged a completely new system of government." Well, that caused a huge pause. Carter elaborated. And incidentally, it was a brand new government, one that had no proven track record, one that had the idealistic and naive belief that the people themselves should control the government and not have the government control them. It was one that declared that everyone had certain inalienable rights to live free, happy lives and not be controlled, manipulated, and subjugated to some powerful, wealthy, or royal elite. Silence. He continued. So I strongly disagree with your position on this, Jordan. Just because the money system has been around for centuries and has provided some sort of organizing factor to the way we conduct our lives does not mean that it should continue, any more than some monarchy should continue ruling over people just because that's the way it has been as far back as people can remember. Even if it has worked to some degree for some of the people, some of the time, and even if the people themselves have been lulled into a complacency about it out of habit. He explained further. These discussions have certainly made it clear to me, and apparently to you as well, that there are a great many grievous faults inherent in the money system. And because they are inherent, can never be solved, only placated, only temporarily covered up and disguised, but never remedied. It's antiquated. It can never get us as a whole, as a species, where we aspire to be. It has actually become detrimental. So why hang on to it? It's time we let it go. It's time to replace it with one that, though untried, you want to label that as idealistic and naive, but I see it as practical. We were all kind of shocked at Carter. His whole little speech sort of came out of nowhere. He seemed to be quite passionate about the whole thing. He was normally on the quiet, reserved side of the fence. You could tell he sort of felt kind of bad that he'd come on so strong in response to Jordan. Once the shock subsided, he took the opportunity to patch things up with Jordan. Look, Jordan, he began, I know you don't have much faith in this cooperative thing, and actually, that's great. Because you bring up opposing arguments that sooner or later somebody is bound to bring up. It keeps us honest. It keeps us really thinking about what we're saying. It keeps us grounded a bit in reality. But even being opposed, you've got to wonder how far this can legitimately go. Even if, as you believe, it's going to fall flat on its face, you've got to be curious. In order to address Mike's concerns about feeling like he'll be serving out a 20-year sentence, doing time in the workforce, we have to continue with this discussion and figure out how it might all work. We haven't really gotten that far yet. Mike brings up a good point that needs to be addressed. So let's address it. Let's examine what this workforce life might look like before we trash the whole cooperatism concept. Everyone looked at Jordan. Well, you're right about me being curious, he replied. I must admit that. But unlike you, I am not hoping that it all works out. I already know how it's going to work out. I'm just curious which unresolved roadblock will finally get you all to admit that it can't go any further. We've got nothing to lose but class time. Carter then admitted that if workforce participation turns out to be what Mike fears, then I guess I would also start to question whether I'd want to actually adopt this system. Okay, let's see, was Jordan's response. All right, said Strickland. Any ideas on how the workforce will be handled? Now we will quote from Katie Dessinger's account. The whole Carden-Jordan thing was very intense, to say the least. I think that's when Jordan really started to give some thought to all of his own unshakable opinions about cooperatism in general, and began rethinking and questioning them. It was not like he wasn't still completely outwardly opposed to it, but I wondered if he still considered it to be a topic unworthy of discussion. Ken forged ahead by giving his take on what Mike had brought up earlier. I kind of feel like for a lot of people in the money system, I don't know if it's a majority or not, but it might be, that they feel what Mike described as serving out a workforce sentence is kind of how they feel about their lives and careers in this system. They're just putting in their time so they can retire and finally really enjoy life. But for them, It's closer to 40 years instead of 20. Then Milt brought us back to his spreadsheet and said, well, according to our best estimate so far, based on the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics and its Occupational Outlook Handbook, we've approximated that 25% of the population would be needed working an assumed 40-hour work week for 20 years in order to maintain a cooperative system for the entire population. But realistically, I think we've all more or less agreed that this figure is high because we intentionally agreed to leave in all of the occupations where there was any doubt at all about them being needed. In all honesty, it's probably more accurate at 20%. And even that, I'm thinking, could be streamlined. Jason jumped in. Yeah, he said, I agree with that. Advancements in technology alone will figure greatly into decreasing that figure over time. As industry becomes more and more automated, the size of the workforce will automatically decrease, just as it does now. Only instead of less jobs weakening the economy and creating hardships for sectors of the population, in cooperativism, it will be welcomed and actually be an improvement for everyone. Then people just started brainstorming and conjecturing about how things would change with regard to the working atmosphere in a cooperative environment versus a capitalistic one. Good points were made as to how the absence of money would change the way things were done in terms of efficiency, attitudes, motivations, etc. Linda was first to voice her thoughts. I'm thinking the efficiency of our production systems will improve under the new system. Things like cutting corners to save money won't have to happen anymore. Why would it? Money and profit will cease to be an issue, and I'm thinking workers will, in general, care more because they themselves and their families and friends will be the ones benefiting from the jobs well done. It won't be simply a paycheck they're working for anymore. They will be contributing to some essential aspect of maintaining the lifestyle everyone counts on, including themselves. Money and time will no longer be factors in providing the best equipment, the most accommodating working environment, as well as safe, efficient, and effective methods for accomplishing the agreed-upon tasks. I can see these things being a matter of course in cooperativism. If someone has an idea to improve things, it can be simply done without worrying about cost versus profits or time versus quotas or management keeping their jobs. People will be able to take their time and do the job right because they will no longer be continually pushed by management that is in a race, a competition with other companies for a greater piece of the market. There won't be any market. Scott added, and there won't be a need to work overtime anymore or put in long hours. All of that has to do with dealing with deadlines and contracts and competition. Everyone will be on the same team, working towards the same goals. Tracy then got into the mix. The weekends will go back to being days off for almost everyone, more like it used to be in older times, in simpler days before all of this 24/7 customer convenience and round-the-clock customer service that has become the norm due to fierce competition. Milt then made the point, there still may be certain tasks that need to run 24/7, things like electric power, communications, etc., but even these could be running skeleton crews at night or on weekends. Then Joe pointed out, there won't be any retail operations anymore because there won't be any stores anymore. John added, I see the entire landscape of the working environment drastically changing. It won't be a top-down process. The workers themselves will refine the procedures and make the changes, not based on profits, but on efficiency and quality. Motivation will change. I'm not seeing it as a tightly controlled and policed structure that is overly micromanaged like Mike had pictured it. Carter then said, workers will be able to periodically move around, trying new roles and new positions. No one need get stuck with a specific task for 20 years. There will be many employees trained in every aspect of an operation, so when someone is ill or requests time off, There is no position that cannot be effectively covered by many other workers, creating a great deal of depth in the workforce. Then Emma had this thought. Yes, I see the environment as far friendlier than Mike is picturing. There would be no cost attached to someone making a mistake, no loss of profit, no missed deadlines. So the atmosphere would be more tolerant. People would have more patience in the absence of fierce competition. There would be no such thing as layoffs due to decreased sales. The only layoffs that would occur would be those associated with improved efficiency and technology. And this would be a good thing because it would mean that less people would be needed in the workforce, decreasing everyone's workforce obligations. Then I said, and there will be no longer any sharp delineation between workers and management. Essentially, they will be one and the same. The workers themselves will be privy to the entire operation and will be able to make group decisions regarding procedures, relying more heavily on those with more experience and those with a greater aptitude in the various tasks or techniques. Emma jumped back in with, it would clearly be to everyone's advantage to help each other and guide the newcomers. People would be working for themselves, for their own benefit, supporting their very way of life. There would be no employee competition. No one would be out to get someone else's job. I then summarized and said, so the years spent in the workforce, contrary to what Mike was envisioning, I think might be very productive and rewarding, interesting, and in a way, a very fulfilling period of one's life. You will be supporting your coworkers, peers, friends, and family who will be counting on and supporting you to do your part. Then Jordan mentioned, it seems this system will be very vulnerable to people taking advantage of it, don't you think? You're counting on people in general to be quite fair and understanding, tolerant, and honest with each other. I'm not so sure that will hold up, given human nature being what it is. Yeah, echoed Ken. Jordan makes a good point. Not everyone is going to embrace the sentiments, trustworthiness, ethics, and ideals of what you're talking about here. There's going to be loafers and scammers and schemers. Sure, Milt said. There will be those that try to take advantage of the system in any way they can, of course. But let's face it, the money system cannot boast any advantage there. In my opinion, we would see far less of this under cooperatism just because of how it's structured. The whole peer pressure aspect would seem to be greater, don't you think? Everyone would be working to maintain the needed services for society, including themselves. If it goes badly, then everyone suffers, including the loafers, because they are also depending on those services. So if you're not pulling your own weight, it will quickly be perceived by your coworkers, who will more than likely be concerned. Your friends, family, and peers will be in some way directly and or indirectly affected by your actions or inaction, making it tougher to let it slide, and even tougher, most likely, to justify, even in the perpetrator's mind. It's all more out in the open. It would be there for everyone to see. He continued, if we look at the money system, it's obvious that there are throngs of people using legal and illegal means to fraud the system. And this is accepted. It's even admired to a greater or lesser degree. Often you're not perceived as hurting anyone else in particular, but rather as beating the system. I'm thinking, Jordan, that if someone told you that some wealthy person was using write-offs, capital gains, and tax loopholes to hang on to more of their profits, then you would most likely respect and admire that individual, wouldn't you? It's considered smart. And then we have all the people taking advantage of the welfare system. I can't see that cooperatism is at any disadvantage here, not by a long shot. He added, I think everyone has to admit that the money system actually encourages dishonesty and corruption to a great degree, whereas in a cooperative system, any advantage gained by that type of behavior, and in cooperatism, what advantage could there be other than conniving a way to work less hours or put forth less effort, would be greatly compromised by a loss of respect and socialization with one's peers. He concluded with, "So for me, it's not so much of a question of whether or not there will be loafers, scammers, and lazy people in either system, because certainly there will be, but rather in which system will it be more prevalent. I'm sure there could be strong arguments either way, but for me, I would have to guess that in the money system, there are much greater payoffs and encouragement, and therefore more incentives for such behavior." He then admitted, "But I see why you raised the point, Jordan. I was also thinking that maybe we were painting far too rosy a picture of cooperatism. However, even at its worst, I still think it comes out ahead." Strickland ended class by summarizing, "A few people have voiced the concern that their vision of the workforce is comparable to serving out a prison sentence. Milt brought up the idea that our original figure of 25% of the population participating in the workforce is high. He contends that there are numerous job categories that we kept in the workforce figures that ultimately won't be needed. He also started a class discussion about certain advantages in a cooperative workforce environment that would allow the workforce to function more efficiently than in a money system, streamlining operations and therefore reducing workforce numbers even more, bringing us confidently to a 20% figure with a strong argument to safely drop below that. I'm assuming his point being that each individual's sentence to the workforce would be even less than the 20 years we estimated and far less than the money system's traditional 40 years. This started a class discussion about how, under a cooperative system, the entire landscape of the workforce environment might change, and that the atmosphere, instead of being like a forced prison sentence, would be less of an employer-employee structure, less intimidating, less controlled, and more enjoyable, rewarding, and cooperative in nature than the current system. For next class, give some thought about Beckwith's idea of a rotation system. How would this work, and how would it fit into this new workforce atmosphere? Carter alluded to this earlier when he pointed out that there would be less of a need for specialization and how workers would be freer to cross-train.